I'm reasonably confident that everybody here has had some experience with some pushback from someone. There's been this traditional set of beliefs and values about what we do as statisticians and how we might work with our clients and colleagues. The world is now challenging some of these, be it due to how the world has evolved, or maybe because they were not entirely sound to begin with. So I'm going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes talking about a few ideas about humans that could challenge our view of working with clients and colleagues. Now, these are some pretty big topics, so my goal here is to get us started in thinking about them and maybe reframe how we approach working with our clients and colleagues. So the first idea is that data are not really an objective representation of the reality, not from the perspective of a data layperson, at least not on their own and definitely not to everybody. I'm not referring to the errors in the data. That has to do with the data contents, but rather the issue is with the incorrect interpretation of the data. This is obviously an important distinction, but to an average person, all data problems tend to be thrown into this one giant pile. The world has been pushing others to trust data as facts, so to speak, so the notion that there is any room for interpretation is going to seem rather contradictory to an average person. And this is exactly the problem. What someone believes to be fact is often not the objective truth, but rather a truth of a different objective, or really an extrapolation by the person consuming the information. It is a truth, but not the truth. So as statisticians, we understand this at least on paper. Data are an objective representation of a reality, but only for a specific purpose and under a specific set of assumptions and conditions. And it is not the way that a typical data layperson sees things from the practical perspective. We put a lot of language around our analysis with all kinds of caveats, but if you're an average person and if you were to take these caveats literally, it's like the legal disclaimers, the terms and conditions that we see everywhere these days, and we all have certain feelings about those. Then dare I say that data are stupid and lazy. Data people often argue things like, well, that's what the data says. But data do not say or do anything on their own. It requires a lot of mental processing, not just on the statistician side, but also on the data consumer side. Data say, quote unquote, things only through an intermediary, the statisticians. We're kind of like the spiritual mediums for data, and it's like we have to run a seance to help people communicate with data. So if I am a data layperson, I'm saying it's not easy and it's valid only under a very specific set of conditions. It might as well be invalid because it requires too much work. Or I might just brute force a sucker to fit my needs. So a perfect example is what's happening right now with all the COVID-19 data. As statisticians, we know there's a good reason for all the inconsistencies. And this is all expected because COVID-19, thankfully, is not a design experiment. We know this, but they don't. From the perspective of average people, this is data we're talking about. It's been pounded in our heads that they are immutable facts. Now, errors in data contents are relatively straightforward to address because they are generally purely logical. This, on the other hand, has to do with how humans look at data. So we want to rethink how we frame the reality through data for the consumer mindset. The second idea is this. Rationality, unlike sex, does not sell. Let's establish this right now, that humans are irrational. First of all, insisting rationality on people will cause them to push back. People have certain beliefs and value systems. When something rational goes against these beliefs and value systems, it mentally and emotionally doesn't jibe. It takes an effort to accept, and it's easier to reject rationality instead. Somewhat related to that is the idea of confirmation bias. It's easier to accept data if the data agrees with what you already think or believe. We have all seen others, not just politicians, but average citizens, perhaps some of our friends, use hard facts, quote unquote, to support their own agenda through the pandemic. But the more important aspect of rationality, I like the analogy I heard from Gartner. The essence of the analogy is this. Think of a doctor delivering bad news to a patient, something like a positive biopsy result. If you think of what the doctor and the patient each goes through, their journeys are different. Now, the doctor's responsibility is to understand and deliver the medical fact. So he or she is on a fundamentally rational medical journey. It's a professional journey. The doctor is not trying to be uncaring. He or she is just doing his or her job. The patient, on the other hand, is on an emotional journey that just happens to be medical. So every weight, every non-information adds to the uncertainty that builds up these emotions. The doctor's late coming into the exam room. Maybe the doctor just got caught up on the way. It could be totally innocuous, but it adds to the anxiety. Now we can draw a parallel for us. We, the data people, are on a fundamentally rational professional data journey. We're not uncaring, but our clients and our colleagues are on a different journey from ours, often an emotional one that just happens to involve data. Then when there's a pushback, often our instinct just says, well, if they could just understand better, so let's give them more data. This is in effect saying, you have a problem with rationality? I'll give you more of what you don't want. Of course, I mean this sarcastically. This is not the answer because it's rationality that's at the heart of this conflict. In a bit of a tangent, but related to this, we want to seriously rethink the notion that we need more data literacy to develop a data-oriented culture. Some of this is true, but it assumes that the organization, and especially the people in it, are largely rational. Finally, we tend to complicate all this by assuming that we are rational. And unfortunately, we end up getting defensive, and that in turn only alienates other people. We like rationality. We're statisticians after all, but we're not rational beings. The third idea is this. Our biggest competition is our clients' or our colleagues' expectations as consumers. I'm referring to our everyday experience as a consumer. I don't think we have viewed the role of the statistician from a competitive standpoint. And I don't mean statisticians competing against other statisticians to see who wins the job. I'm referring to the idea that when we work with someone, he or she compares us not only to other statisticians, but to all other experiences the person has had as a consumer. Now, we do understand what it's like to be consumers because we're consumers ourselves. And as consumers, we just want what we want. We want our experience of getting what we need to be smooth and kind of all in the background. We also judge every product or service we receive on the total experience of getting that product or service, not just on the product or the service on its own. Getting an Uber or Lyft and buying from Amazon are a couple examples that a lot of us can probably relate to, and I actually refer to a lot. These consumer experiences frame our client's experience with us, whether we want it or not. We compete with other alternatives that are not even statistical. Part of that involves what we do before and in between client touchpoints. This is a critical part of the total experience. We have an initial meeting with a client, then we may have several other meetings or communications with a client, then we do the final delivery and close out the project, then the engagement is done. So we have traditionally thought of this engagement as something consisting of these touch points, these discrete dots. And we deliver the statistical contents, the rational stuff, during these touch points. But the client views the engagement as not just the dots, but the entire arrow with the dots that happen to be within the arrow. The client also has experiences from services that have delighted him or her and is sizing us up against those delightful experiences. Not on purpose, though. So our experience as consumers shape our expectations from professional services. Amazon tells you the status of the package and when you can expect a delivery. Rideshares tell you where your ride is as you wait and about how long it'll take to get to you. And any changes and you get an alert. They proactively manage your expectations in between touch points. And all these experiences as consumers form a set of tacit expectations from anyone providing us a service, including professional services. And not only that, these between touchpoint periods come with risks, and we usually don't have a full control over these risks. There may be events during these periods that build up anxiety for our clients. Whether you like it or not, it becomes a part of the total experience simply by association. Do you ever have those moments someone reacts negatively and totally out of the blue, and you have no idea, and you're like, what the hell did they do? Or you get to the office really grumpy because of traffic, and that screws your day at work. The traffic itself has nothing to do with your work. All these other cars around you did not come out to make your workday tough, but you were on your way to work, and it gets associated and even creates a downstream impact. Our experiences as humans are on a continuum. They are not a set of discrete, disconnected events. To the client, the human, his or her interaction with you is not an event that's disconnected from everything else. Now, we often operate as if our clients are memoryless, so to speak. Going back to the example of the doctor and of the patient, the doctor doesn't know that the patient has, say, lost his or her job or broke up with someone, or worse, recently had a close friend pass away. But these experiences cannot be isolated from the news that the patient is about to receive. So what then? Obviously, it's impractical to prescribe an answer to each one of our many situations, because we're dealing with an infinite universe of human things. So 3 things we can keep in mind as we reframe our approach and hopefully start doing. The first thing is to work to develop awareness at every opportunity. Strive to be perceptive of the surrounding or the environment, and most importantly, of the person in front of you. We can put in an effort to be aware and at least be mentally prepared to react and adjust the best we can. Now, this isn't something you can just flip on a switch and say, hey, I'm just going to be more perceptive and aware today. But we have to start making the effort. The second thing is empathy. We need to really understand our clients. This, of course, includes listening to the client. I like what Stephen Covey says. We often listen to respond rather than to understand. We've all done this. We're too busy developing our response while we're listening to the client. Forget responding. Just listen to understand, and you'll start to pick up on different things. Then, as we understand the client better, we control how we react, how we respond. The third thing we can do is to rethink our idea of client centricity. We have to start looking at our clients and colleagues as consumers. So this means being aware of the consumer's total experience of dealing with us, dealing with statistics and with statisticians. Now, consumers do not decide what to consume purely based on the quality of the end product or end service itself. Rather, consumer pick the best available path of least resistance. Harry Beckwith is a well-known authority on sales and marketing who says, prospects don't try to make the best choice. They try to make the most comfortable choice. Some of us might be familiar with Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for his work in behavioral economics. He calls it the law of least effort. And I quote, "If there are several ways of achieving the same goal, people will eventually gravitate to the least demanding course of action. In the economy of action, effort is a cost, and the acquisition is driven by the balance of benefits and costs." That's what we're dealing with. The best statistician, the best data do not always win. So we want to manage the time before and between client touchpoints. Communicate and manage expectations proactively. If the client felt the need to ask, then we've already created this anxiety in his or her mind. And we want to reduce any kind of cognitive strain or anxiety that could impact his or her willingness. These aren't big things, but there are a lot of little things here that add up that we really have to think about. And finally, rather than going full throttle on selling the benefits of statistics, we want to really make sure that there are no detriments. So counterintuitive, and it's very human. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and comments.